You've insulted me, and you've insulted this company with that bastard creation of yours.
And even just with Russia, President Obama and the EU today announced a dramatic increase in the sanctions against Russia. Because Russia itself annexed part of Ukraine this spring in Crimea, because since then Russia has been supporting breakaway separatists in another part of Ukraine, because the U.S. now says that Russia is no longer just supporting those rebels in eastern Ukraine, but is itself actively participating in the war itself against Ukraine by firing Russian artillery across the border into that other country. Because Russia or the separatists it is supporting are being blamed for that shoot down of that Malaysia Airlines passenger jet 2 weeks ago. And regardless of who's actually responsible for it, the separatists do control the crash site, and they've not only blocked investigators from accessing the site, they themselves have also tampered with the debris and taken some of the debris and neglected and mishandled the remains of the people who died in that crash and their personal effects. I mean, the world is mad at Russia.
I like it!
Russia was trying to create 2 new countries inside the nation of Georgia. You'll remember that Vladimir Putin in 2008 invaded Georgia. Russia and Georgia went to war for about a week. There were pro-Russia local governments in these 2 places inside Georgia, in Abkhazia in the west and in South Ossetia in the east. After that war, Russia decided to recognize each of those places as their own country.
I like it!
A list of 7 Russian officials and 4 Crimean officials who were subject not only to travel bans, but also to having their financial assets frozen. Now, at the time that President Obama announced that second cranking up of sanctions, the president also announced that he'd signed an executive order giving himself further authority to impose even deeper sanctions on more people and on some Russian financial and economic interests. Today, that executive order was put to good use when the president took a 3rd shot at it, a 3rd escalation of the sanctions. The president took to the South Lawn of the White House this morning to announce a new blacklist, essentially, of a wide assortment of politically connected Russian zillionaires.
I like it!
And the anger in particular about the passenger plane being shot down. For all of those reasons, the EU decided now that they're going to get off their wallet. And they have leveled the most serious European sanctions against Russia since the Cold War. I mean, the American sanctions were already very strong, but today, what the president announced is going to rope off nearly 1/3 of Russia's banks from the rest of the financial world. It will also, and this may be key, it'll also block Russia from buying any technology that'll help its oil industry. So no deep water oil production technology, no deep water oil exploration technology, no technology for fracking their oil that is locked up in shale deposits. Remember Exxon and Rosneft, the Russian-owned oil company? They did the mother of all oil deals recently to do deep water exploration and shale oil exploration and exploitation in Russia. They did that huge deal not that long ago. If it turns out they can't actually get at and produce that Russian oil because of these new sanctions, and it hurts the biggest oil deal in the world, this Exxon deal, that's going to hurt.
I like it!
Ultimately, it was humiliating for Russia. It was a humiliation for Russia to try and then fail to win the affections of this teeny tiny little nation. Russia was more successful, though, with an even teenier nation, with the 2nd smallest nation on Earth, which is called Nauru. Nauru reportedly got $50 million from Russia in exchange for recognizing both Abkhazia and South Ossetia. It's believed that the same sort of deal was worked out for Nicaragua, although we don't know exactly how much Nicaragua got for agreeing to recognize those countries. It seems like the country that got the best deal for selling off its diplomatic relations for these little countries that Russia wanted to create, it seems like the country that probably got the best deal was Venezuela, which is reported to have cashed in its recognition of those 2 countries inside Georgia for a cool $2 billion in Russian military aid. Think about this from Russia's perspective, though. Russia had to go all around the world. They had to spend $2 billion plus lobbying all of these teeny tiny or otherwise dependent little countries to please side with them against the rest of the world.
I like it!
So Europe does its strongest sanctions. The U.S. upgrades its already stiff sanctions to include even something that might hurt Exxon. Imagine. So in a world gone mad, and even if you just look at Russia, things between the United States and Russia are, as the president said today, not back into the Cold War, but effectively at a state of what looks like full-scale economic war. Full-scale economic and diplomatic war between our 2 countries.
I like it!
What President Obama did unilaterally today was to sanction one particular Russian bank, a bank that is basically considered to be Vladimir Putin's bank. It has about $10 billion in assets, reportedly. It's seen as mostly handling financial transactions for the elite of the elite in Russia, including President Putin himself. Because of what President Obama did today, that elite bank in Russia will no longer have access to dollars. And as the Washington Post says it today, the correspondent accounts with U.S. banks will also now be terminated, although I'm not exactly sure what that means.
I like it!
On Sunday of this week, Russia is having the Crimean Peninsula in Ukraine vote not on becoming an independent nation, but on becoming part of Russia. If Crimea were to vote on becoming an independent nation, well, then you're back to the Vanuatu problem. That would give every other country in the world the chance to express their opinion by whether or not they recognize it as an independent nation, whether or not they send an ambassador, whether or not they vote to allow that nation to join the United Nations, whether they set up embassies, whether they open up trade relations, all of these other things that you have to do if another country comes into an existence, and it would be just like what happened in Georgia. But instead, if Russia just takes Crimea into its own territory, takes Crimea into the existing nation of Russia, then Russia does something that is arguably even more inflammatory to the international community, just unilaterally annexing new territory. But it's an action that saves them from the Vanuatu-style international humiliation that they just went through a few years ago. I wonder if that means they're learning.
I like it!
There was some bare evidence of governance creeping forward today in Washington. And President Obama, for his part, did take a really big swipe at Russia today. He did it in conjunction with the European Union. He and the Europeans are now pushing Russia harder than they have been pushed in decades, including hitting them on this missile treaty thing and hitting them on oil, which I think is where it really hurts. If we did have an ambassador to Russia right now, what would that ambassador advise the president on these matters? And what would that ambassador say about how all this is going to play out now that Russia is being pushed harder than they have been since the Cold War?
I like it!
President Obama today also gave himself yet further leeway to hit Russia in a way that wouldn't just affect, say, Vladimir Putin's own personal money, just the elites, but might affect that whole country in more of a gut punch way.
You're calling Russia democracy? Did you get paid to say that?
Putin's on my, just texted me, telling me my talking points. No, I mean, we're talking about a country, it's incomparable. Like,
this is a democracy, Abby. This is a democracy. Hey, if you say this is a democracy...
We know that democracy doesn't exist, all right?
I'll go on a shirtless horse ride with you, no?
That was the wrong term. But I'm just saying, when people look at Russia and they have all this fucking criticism of it, warranted, all right? But at the same time, I mean, we're looking at completely different factors here. The Soviet Union collapsed not that long ago. You know, I mean, it's controlled by a couple oligarchs. It's a fucked up place. You will not see me being on there saying pro-Russian news. I've never done a pro-Russian story.